Hi, welcome to Closures in JavaScript. I'm Deepa and I would like to explain closures in JavaScript. I'm using Udacity Front-End Nano Degree Program course material as a reference for it. So, as a basic, we'll be touching on functions, function scope, and closures. What are functions? Functions are the simplest form of adding dynamic nature for a website. Functions are the callbacks for event handlers. When you click on a button, you pass a function as an argument to the click event handler, which in turn is a function. So we can call function as a first class function. Why? Because it could be stored in a variable, be returned from a function, and be passed as arguments into another function. And now let's move on to function scope. So when searching for variables along the scope chain, in what order will the JavaScript interpreter search? It will search for first in the local variable section. If not available over there, then it goes to parent functions variable. And if not there, it goes to parent functions variable. And if not there, it goes to global variables and executes them. So this is like we know a real understanding of the function scope. And now let's move on to closures. So what is a closure? EMDN defines closure as a combination of a function and the lexical environment within which that function was declared. So I found it very difficult to understand, so I have broken down into two different questions, like when is a closure created? A closure is created when a function returns a function, and the return function is going to use the parent function's local variable and/or the parent function's parameter, which is immutable. So in these two conditions, the JavaScript will create a closure. But why is a closure created only then? Because as per function definition or its strength, it states that a function can return a function and a nested function has access to its parent function variables. So if these two statements has to be true, then JavaScript compiler creates a closure to allow a returned function to have access to its parent function's local variable. So this is why a closure is created. Now we have understood this, and now let's see closure in action. See, a simple function returns a function, but no closures are created. There's no closure created because the inner returning function is alerting message to, and it doesn't use any variables of its parent function. So there is no closure created here. Now let's see a simple example of a closure. Function remember of n returns a function, and this function returns the value of n. So a secret key variable is created, remember of 3, and console.log secret of key. Why here a closure is created? Because the return function is accessing a parent function's parameter n. So let's see this in action. See a simple example of closure. So there is a function remember of n, and I'm creating a secret key variable, global variable, because I haven't used any let here. And the remember of 3, I'm going to call remember of 3 and store that return function in secret key. So let's do that. Inside remember of n, the value of n is 3. If you see the local n3, and there's no closure yet created. But when it enters the return function, you will see in the scope, under the scope, that there is a closure. And the closure retains the value of n as 3. Okay. So because n is the parent function's parameter, and when it is used inside the return function, it is stored inside a closure. And now when you log the console.log, so you see here the closure is, it goes and executes the return function return n. And see, when you see the scope here, the closure, the value of n is there, which is 3, and it's going to return that and print it on the console.log. See here, there is 3. Okay, now let's see this function remember of n. So here I'm using remember of n and I'm calling returning a function that takes the parameter n and returns n. So I'm using the same variable name n in both the parent function and the return function. So when you see this, there won't be a closure created because it's not using the parent n. Since it's used the same variable name n, it doesn't mean that it is using the parent function's variable. It is using the variable that it is passed to itself. Sorry. So the function remember n and it returns a function that takes a new parameter n and it is returning n. So when I execute it, you will see that there is no closure created. I'm stepping into it. So the return function, you see the return value function and you see the scopes. There's only a global scope. There is no closure created because n is like a new parameter. It is not using the parent function's parameter. So there is no need for creating a closure. Since we haven't passed any value inside when calling secret key of key, it is n is undefined, and when you print it, it's going to be undefined. Okay, let's see this function remember n again, and we are calling remember of n and it returns a function, but this time it takes a different parameter name which is m and it returns n plus m. So let's see it in action. So when the debugger it goes inside creating a return function, and when you see in the return value returning the function, there is a closure. You see the value of n is maintained. So the secret variable is now contains the return function of remember, and when we call secret key of 6, m takes the value of 6 and see the closure, it is n is 3 and m is 6. So when we say to return n plus m, it does 6 plus 3 and returns 9. Now when you see the console log, the value 9 is printed. So we saw the simple functions of creating closures. Now let's see a practical example of using closure. Let's say you wanted to create a cat object. So here this function is a constructor function that creates a cat object, and it takes in three public properties: name, age, and image. Cat image is the URL of the image file, and then it has two methods: increment counter and get counter, which are public methods. I didn't want to have a the operation that I'm going to do here is click counter. I'm going to increment or display on the screen how many times the cat image was clicked. So You can have a click counter as a property and have a method just increment the click counter, but it's not private. Anybody could you open the debugger and just change the value of click counter and it will accept. So everything uh, that is created with this dot a property is public. So how will you create a private variable? So if you want to create a private variable, then you can make use of closures, because a function that is returning a function has access to its parent function variable. Only the return function can access the parent function variable, and nothing other than that return function can access the parent function variable. So this creates a perfect environment for creating a private variable. So this is why we have the click counter. I'm using the let keyword here, so which makes it sure that click counter is a local variable, and counter is passed as a parameter, so I am passing here as 0. I'm creating a global variable white cat, and I'm creating a new object using the constructor function cat. The name is fluffy. Ages to counter is 0, and I'm passing the image of the cat. So we are all concerned about whitecat.getCounter and increment counter. So when I call whitecat.getCounter, it is going to call the getCounter method over in the constructor function, and it is going to return the click counter, which is the local variable of the cat function. So here a closure will be created and the click counter value is returned here. You can see there is another secret word local variable called meow, and I'm displaying it on the console when the get counter is created. Why? So my point in explaining here is the secret word is again a local variable of the cat function, and so this secret word is also maintained in the closures. But let something is equal to ABC, this will not be in the closure variable list. Why? Because it is not used by any of the return functions. By the way, even though we are not calling return function, we are assigning it to the variable this dot increment counter, and this in turn acts as a property. So even after the execution of the cat function is over, the function is though the return keyword is not there, the function is assigned to a property as a public property to the cat function. So it mimics the return function functionality. So let's see this in action. Age is created, an image, then click counter, that's a local variable, then the increment counter is a function, then it creates the get counter, then the secret word and something ABC. Now let's on click. So I have clicked on the cat picture and you can see that it has stopped with the increment counter because I have wired on click function to call whitecat.increment counter. So it's in the debugger, and if you see it's the local scope here. Let's step inside, and there is a closure here, and you can see there are two variables, click counter and secret word in the closure for the cat. Then click counter is incremented, so the click counter is changed to 1, and then we are going to call whitecat.getCounter, and we step inside. These are for printing it on the screen. It should come here. Okay, we are now in the debugger has come inside the get counter, and if you see again the close click counter is able to retain the value of the, and here we can see that the variable has incremented to 1 2 3 4 and 5, and these are the properties of the cat object that we created: name, age, image, increment counter and get counter. So increment counter and get counter are the two property public methods of the constructor function cat, and these two function has access to the local variable click counter of the cat constructor function. So closure